ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. And today, on the 19th of June 2019, we are starting a look at the penultimate story from the 8th series of 4th Doctor Adventures, Fever Island. Now, Fever Island is interesting because it is out and out a James Bond parody. A lot of this first episode primarily concerns Jason Vane, a played by Gethin Anthony, basically our James Bond stand-in. Interestingly enough, he's one of those characters where you have basically written someone who is basically suave. He works for basically the British Secret Service, not specifically stated to be MI6 like James Bond, but pretty darn close. Obviously, it's one of those stories where a lot of the fun is coming from a lot of the fun is coming from the characters interacting with each other, and basically, and basically, being great characters to each other. There's a Miss Moneypenny stand-in. Basically, if you have seen any of the James Bond films, you'll sort of get where they're coming from. And it's stories like this that are really quite a lot of fun. I mean, you have obviously characters who build up a relationship. They come together. You have a lot of this episode, and a lot of the episode focusing on Jason Vane and his sort of adventure really helps because, oddly enough, the Doctor and Anne don't actually get involved until the very end. Like for the Doctor and Anne, this comes right after. It comes right after Time's Assassin, where you have that the TARDIS being dragged off course. The characters trying to deal with that. The Doctor and Anne surviving that. Oddly enough, but what's interesting is that Fever Island is a weird place. There's a scientific research center who's sending out this mist, and the big reveal is that the Doctor is Akarov and K9 is transformed into this Russian Bond villain, and K9 is transformed into his servant Cerberus. It's a very weird script. Seriously, what's going? A lot of the question is what the hell is going on here, and which is genuinely a good question. Like where's all this crazy coming from? Where is the Doctor really evil? What's going on Fever Island? Anne is basically working as the audience insert by that point, just questioning, that doesn't make any sense because it's the Doctor, and as much as she knows the Doctor right now, that the Doctor wouldn't do something like that. That this is this is not something the Doctor does. It's a very, and it's very, very weird and very much intentionally so. This is the first script written by Jonathan Barnes, who, in terms of Big Finish, basically wrote there some adaptations of their classics, mainly Dracula and then Frankenstein. But in terms of Doctor Who, this is the first. This is the first that we're actually seeing of him. He wrote mainly for Doctor Who. He's written some short trips, and he wrote a Fifth Doctor story that we'll eventually cover. And as a story, as an episode, intriguing. Perhaps is the proper word to use here. Because again, Geth and Anthony's great. K9 is great. Like, you have this mystery of why can K9 apparently dream now? Why which is something. He's a robot dog. A robot dog. He shouldn't be able to dream. He's not. He's not that sort of character. And John Leeson is great as K9, and a lot of the story is great. Perhaps some of the Bond stuff will be lost if you aren't familiar with Bond films, but overall, it's genuinely an enjoyable. It's genuinely an enjoyable. It's genuinely an enjoyable romp here with it's fun characters, really it's a lot of fun here, a lot of good questions to ask. It sets up a really good story, even with having the Doctor only and only coming in near the end of the first episode. That cliffhanger is just a gut punch. Like, why is the Doctor evil? What's going on here? So overall, I'm going to give Fever Island Part 1 a 9 out of 10. It is the 20th of June 2019, and I just finished listening to Part 2 of Fever Island, the concluding episode of the story. And this is the first episode in a bit of a while that I think actually is nearly perfect. It's a bit longer than the first part. It runs at about 36 minutes, where the first episode ran about 7 minutes shorter. But what's interesting is that, unlike the previous episodes, unlike the first episode, this one is really concerned with getting to the bottom mystery of who Jason Vane is, why the Doctor is turning to it, and really what's behind this. Like, what caused the TARDIS to crash here on Fever Island. Now, what's interesting is that it's very obviously it's actually the experiments are that are mainly dealing with they're dealing with this sort of mist stuff. It's that this mist ripped a hole in the universe, and it's playing off mainly this guy's fantasy. Now, like, you have the Jason Vane character, whose real name is Clive. He's sort of your run-of-the-mill guy, had kind of not a great life, but not a bad life either. He's lived pretty much through his life as best as he can. Went on vacation with a friend, and basically ended up shipwrecked. And the friend is now Akalov's son, who has been infected with a strain of the Black Plague. Again, in sort of this fashion that we're doing a Bond film that's over the top. This is most definitely something that it's not meant to be taken completely seriously, because obviously we're doing a parody of a James Bond film. This is one of those things where you're just gonna have something crazy in like the plan. Now, and like there are points where the Doctor sort of has to try to fend off the mist, because he's pretty much, for a lot of it, he's become Akalov, or the embodiment of Akalov. It's it's a bit odd, like, and it's almost intentionally messing you up quite a bit. Like it's making you question like what's really going on here. Like, is this really that insane? Which is generally a good question. It's a lot of it is really well done. Um, it's and it's a lot of the Doctor trying to figure stuff out, and really it's a story about Clyde trying to come to terms that that he's a person. He's that this fantasy isn't, and going into fantasy isn't really gonna make him happy. Like, he ends up sort of getting basically a relationship with one of the scientists, because this was all one of those, like, we had a we had a story based. We were basically doing a story based on the whole story. It's this isn't anything that bad. It's overall it's really solid at sort of giving you that good sense of conclusion. And, he gets his life back together, whereas Anne and the Doctor fix things, and they go right on to try to figure out, okay, now we can go after the Syndicate. And it's basically it's one of the few penultimate sort of stories that for the season that really feels like it generates feelings of hype. Like, it does a really good job of building up the finale, and still standing on its own as a story. Like, because a lot of times with these sort of precursors to a finale, especially in the Revive series, there's there's the problem of just that it's a story where there isn't as much there. You don't have that good of an ending, but that's something that Fever Island really avoids. It's one where people change. So overall, I'm going to give Fever Island Part 2 a perfect 10 out of 10. That being said, we average up the two scores of this story to give Fever Island a final score of 9.5 out of 10. Thank you, everybody, for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I always like to hear from you. Tell me if you liked the story, if you didn't, if you agree with my score, if I maybe scored too high, too low. Let's get a conversation going in the comments. And join me next time when we take a look at the 4-part finale of the 8th series of 4th Doctor Adventures, the final episode in the Syndicate Master Plan, The Perfect Prisoners.